Stellar Crown is officially out, and the Shrouded Fable metagame is now behind us, with Worlds 2024 and Baltimore Regionals having concluded as the last major tournament before we dive deep into the caverns of Area 0 and the Stellar Terra Pokemon, which promise to shake things up in the metagame. This video will give you an idea of how I think the tiers will shift with the new set and what I expect the decks to beat will be thanks to the upgrades from Stellar Crown. Starting this weekend, we are heading into a stream of 8 tournaments that will be played in this format, with Dortmund, Joinville, Lima, Louisville, Lille, Gdansk, Buenos Aires, and ending with a bang at the first international of the season, LAIC in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Who will come out on top will be determined by a combination of skill, luck, and the perfect deck choice, as Stellar Crown brings us a lot of interesting and powerful cards such as Area 0 Underdepths, Terrapagos, Sparkling Crystal, Noctowl, amongst others. This long string of tournaments will likely lead to a continuous evolution of the metagame, and top decks and techs and counter techs at the very top, with one archetype being a top contender one week and then heavily flopping the next. The only 2 events that overlap are the first 2, Joinville in the LATAM region and Dortmund in the EU region, but after that, players from one side of the world will be peeling their eyes to find out what is happening on the other side to make sure they're not blindsided by any surprises and can adapt to anything. Whether you're attending any of these tournaments, watching on the stream, or playing a local tournament on the same weekend, there's a lot of shifts and new decks thanks to the upgrades from Stellar Crown. Now be advised that this list stems from my own testing, knowledge and theory, so please bear that in mind when a deck I put in the C tier inevitably wins the first few tournaments, because I'm not an Alakazam that can see into the future. I'm just a table, trying my best. Doing well at a tournament like this, or Worlds, requires a powerful deck, luck and skill. So even though a deck might be unfavored or unlikely to do well in theory, that doesn't mean the stars could align for it to do well in the event itself. Don't forget that you can watch videos 24 hours earlier if you become a channel member by following the link in the description below. This kind of support helps me continue to create content like this, so please consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy the content. Starting off with a C tier, where the decks are cool and are very powerful, solid archetypes and could be good metagame picks in some cases, but they may not be powerful enough to succeed in the Stellar Crown meta. A lot of these have remained in the C tier for a long time now. I don't think Stellar Crown will change that, as they have received no upgrades whatsoever. Starting off with Qianbao, one of the biggest losers of the new set since Dragapult is one of the biggest winners, and between that, Dusknoirs everywhere, and Regidrago decks, the poor Frigibacks just can't stay alive on the bench no matter how much you want them to. Sure, when the deck runs perfectly that one time it feels like the best, but on average, this deck just can't keep up in such an aggressive format, and even its once best matchup, Charizard, now has even more tools against it with Dusknoir and Briar. And speaking of not being able to keep up, this applies to both Lost Zone based decks at the moment, Lost Box and Giratina. While both have a lot of synergy within themselves, and Sablezard did get a bit of a resurgence at Worlds in Baltimore with 3 Day 2 showings combined, I can't see this deck succeeding when Regidrago, Lugia, Dragapult and Charizard are so prevalent and powerful in the current metagame. Next up is Goldengo, which continues to get a few stray Day 2s and might be able to continue that streak in the Stellar Crown metagame, but it just feels a few power levels below the real top contenders, and despite the fantastic coin bonus ability paired with Vezandipity, I just don't think this deck can succeed at the top level. Next we have Banette, which we were able to watch this weekend on stream at Baltimore, but it didn't really show off what it could do. Item locking your opponent, and then systematically taking down threats through the use of Dusknoir's Curse Blast, and benefiting from giving your opponent prize cards during your turn to power up Poltergeist is a great plan, but as we saw on stream, it might be a bit too fragile to succeed at the top, and there's other more reliable and powerful Dusknoir based decks such as Palkia and Terrapagos that likely will perform better than it. And finally, we have Iron Thorns. This is a card that always looks very appealing with high HP, amazing ability, shutting down many top meta decks, and a good enough attack. However, with Dragapult rising in the ranks, the questionable Regidrago matchup, and the Noctowl engine coming into the Stellar Crown metagame, the deck just doesn't feel good enough to me anymore, hence the big drop from the previous metagame. Moving on to the B tier, these decks look and feel great, and are a step above in power to those in the C tier, but have some glaring weaknesses against the more powerful and more popular decks. First, we have one of the most controversial decks, Ancient Box. The deck's hype before the first regional Baltimore was huge, but it didn't translate to a very high meta share. Despite this though, it was one of the best converting decks in Day 2. However, I think its time in the spotlight is about to be over, due to the shifts at the top and also the existence of Briar, allowing decks to accelerate a win condition against these decks by taking an extra prize card and winning one turn earlier. Next up is Roaring Moon, a deck that keeps performing well despite being underrated. Nothing new in Stellar Crown tells me this deck becomes less good. However, it has always had a troubling Charizard matchup, and Charizard does seem to go right to the top of the rankings thanks to Briar and the potential rise in Raging Bolt. This could spell trouble for this deck. However, it has been discarded too many times before, and I think the deck's raw strength and speed can definitely carry it over the line in any situation thanks to Frenzied Gouging taking down anything in its path. This deck is not ranked higher due to having the same issues of falling apart if it fails to take a significant KO in the first turn though, which sometimes it can only do through the use of the unreliable Pokemon catcher. Then we have Snorlax, a deck that everyone loves to hate, and after flunking at Worlds, this deck had a pretty good showing in Baltimore as it adapted to a more established meta. When this deck is least respected though is when it tends to do well, and right now there's a lot of focus on the new cards from Stellar Crown, so perhaps with the right list it could have a successful run in the new metagame. And now, Miraidon, which gets boosted with R0, as not only can you have a lot more benched Pokemon in order to have the correct Pokemon to deal with whatever your opponent is throwing at you, but Raikou's Lightning Rondo can now do more damage thanks to the expanded bench. Even though you have the nuisance of having to play an almost useless Mewtwo for your Terra Pokemon to activate Area 0, you get to also have all the supporting Pokemon you need, such as Serendipity, Radiant Greninja, and Mew, in order to protect yourself from disrupting cards like Iono or Oliver Stamp. Unfortunately though, with Charizard and Dragapult getting boosted by Stellar Crown, this deck still struggles to make its way to the higher tiers in my opinion. And finally, we have the main Pokemon of the Stellar Crown set, Terrapagos. This deck has quite a few variations, but the most successful one I've seen so far is a more aggressive base build including Dusknoir to help boost its damage output and allow it to hit multiple targets at once. With a whole colorless crew of Noctowl, Fanrotom, Bouffalant and Pidgeot helping support the deck, it is very appealing overall. The one big downside for this deck is the self-limitation of not being able to attack with it during your first turn if you want second. A harsh drawback that decks like Roaring Moon, Raging Bolt and Miraidon do not have, and they are all basic base decks trying to rush for KO since the very first turn, just like Terrapagos. With Terrapagos, you can only hope to match them one turn later, and to me, that's the biggest reason this deck will likely not be as powerful. And now, we move on to the A tier, which has had quite a big shakeup in this new Stellar Crown metagame. First is Gardevoir, coming off of a win at the first regional of the season in Baltimore with a very different list than the norm, including Rare Candy and Professor's Research. This deck is still incredibly resilient and can produce masterful comebacks consistently. Drifloon and Screamtail are as threatening as ever, while Fluttermane and Klefki slow down most decks by shutting down their key supporting Pokemon like Rotom, Squawky and Luminion early on. Gardevoir has what it takes to overcome any opponent, though Briar makes the single prize attackers a little less effective, which is why it remains in this tier, as well as the time it takes to set up with fragile and clunky starts. A brand newcomer to the list is Palkia. This card itself is powerful with its Subspace Swell attack and Star Portal ability, and Stellar Crown opens up a higher damage ceiling by allowing and encouraging bigger benches with the Area 0 Stadium. There are two variations of this deck, one featuring Dusknoir in an all-out turbo approach without Area 0 to just end the game as fast as possible and utilize Dusknoir as a way to get KOs and also KO Manaphy to open up Radiant Greninja snipes. And there is a more balanced approach utilizing Area 0 to expand the bench and rely on Terrapagos or Wellspring, Ogerpon and Noctowl as an engine to find key cards at the right time, as well as huge benches with Area 0 to increase its damage output. Which version will be more successful is unclear as of now, with both having significant success at City Leagues in Japan, and the Dusknoir version coming off a 9th place at Baltimore Regionals but not in the Stellar Crown metagame. Either way, expect to see more Palkia at every tournament you go to from now on. Next is Lugia, a deck that seems to be resilient like no other to new sets and has all the right tools to be successful no matter what. Coming off a successful World Championship and an even more successful first regional of the season, Stellar Crown doesn't add anything significant to the deck, nor does it make it anything more or less viable to really affect this deck in a significant way. Despite the sometimes difficult task of discarding Archeops, it thrives in a metagame where most decks are playing powerful 2-price Pokemon thanks to Cinccino's special roll attack, as well as the ever-threatening Iron Hands amp you very much. Charizard rising in the ranks can be a little troublesome for this deck at times, and Briar does make things a bit more awkward for the price mapping of this deck against it at the end of a game. But the deck is still amazingly powerful if you get a solid setup in the beginning. The final tier 8 deck is Regidrago, whose reign at the very top was short, But don't get me wrong, the deck is still a fantastic choice, as Kiruma's Serendipity brought the deck to a whole new level in the previous metagame, and Stellar Crown won't change this. With Regidrago being a resilient and versatile attacker with no weakness, backed by a great support Pokemon with a powerful secondary typing in Teal'c's Kogurpon, and having great answers to control or stall decks, with Switch, Canceling Cologne and Prime Catcher included naturally in the deck, alongside the possibility to reuse them, this deck really has it all. Its biggest downfall right now is the Raging Bolt matchup, being quite tough, and that deck getting upgraded by Briar and also shooting up in popularity. That is why the deck falls one tier, but I would not be surprised if this deck was still able to find its first win in an event thanks to the amazing matchup it has against the other two decks above it, Charizard and Dragapult. And so we arrive at the S tier, where Stellar Crown has definitely shaken things up, and Briar, alongside other powerful cards like Sparkling Crystal, have pushed Charizard, Raging Bolt and Dragapult to the very top of the metagame. So let's talk about Dragapult. Since it is a Terra Pokemon, it can combine the extra prize from Briar with the damage counters from Phantom Dive to take 4 or maybe even 5 prizes in a single turn. With the help of Dusclops and Dusknoir, you could even force an opponent into having 2 prizes remaining, opening up some very cool endgame scenarios and comeback possibilities. The most crucial upgrade though is almost certainly the Sparkling Crystal Aspect tool. Reducing Dragapult's attack cost to a single energy, either Fire or Psychic, is huge, and it makes it so much easier to set up through Arven. Of course, if the Sparkling Crystal is prized, that's an issue, but it will only happen about 10% of the time. With Crispin as another option to power up Dragapult out of the blue, this deck has catapulted its way to the top, and I expect great things from the deck moving forward now that you can more reliably be ready to attack on a regular basis. Then we have Raging Bolt, which has 2 versions now, Noctowl Area Zero or the Turbo Pokestop variant. Both of these have the same goal, take down whatever stands in your way with Raging Bolt's Bellowing Thunder, and the metagame seems to have set up perfectly for this deck at the top of all charts and rankings so far. And now with Stellar Crown, and thanks to having Briar in the deck, Teal'c's Kogurpon becomes a more potent threat and a better backup attacker against single price decks. This change alone makes some bad matchups such as Gardevoir or Ancient Box a lot more manageable, as well as opening up a new win condition against Charizard, which used to be one of its worst matchups. Whichever path you decide to take with the deck, Area Zero or Pokestop, Raging Bolt is settling in at the very top of the metagame. And finally, we have Charizard, which keeps getting better and more threatening with each set, it seems. First, Dusknoir was a big inclusion from Shrouded Fable to give the deck a whole new way to threaten an opponent, while Serendipity provides amazing cover for when you can't set up Pidgeot, or an even more amazing recovery option when combined with Pidgeot itself. And now, Stellar Crown brought it Briar, which grants you that extra prize when attacking with Charizard, allowing you to win under less orthodox situations and promotes more aggressive Prime Catcher builds, and the synergy with Dusclops and Dusknoir's Curse Blast is amazing, as you can force your opponent to have 2 prize cards even if they are actively trying to avoid being in that position, making it even harder to play around. Charizard has had its ups and downs in the metagame, but if Regidrago is kept in check thanks to Raging Bolt, then I fully expect Charizard to be a top contender once again after falling out of favor since NAIC last season. This covers how I think the tiers and metagame will shift with Stellar Crown leading into the 8 major tournaments that will take place all over the world. I'm sure we are in for an exciting time in the Pokemon TCG, and as always, I will continue to reevaluate and adjust my expectations and opinions on the metagame as we have results coming in to see what I overlooked or underestimated and what I perhaps praised a little too much. Is Terrapagos a lie? Will Noctowl become the Antillean replacement we all wish it was? Will Drippy finally top 8 a major tournament? Is Ironthorns a sleeper pick yet again? How will the Turbo Dusknoir decks perform? Keep your eyes peeled and subscribe to his channel if you haven't yet, as we look to answer all these questions and more as the tournaments happen. I hope this video has been useful for you, and if you're heading to Joinville or Dortmund, I wish you the best of luck, and I'd love to hear what you think will do well at the regional this weekend and how you think things will unfold in the Stellar Crown metagame. If you want to support the channel, you can use code tablemon to get 5% off at Potent Store for your online codes, 10% off for your sealed product at Flipside Gaming, and 10% off on your aluminum accessories at TC Evolutions. Or if you're looking to buy singles or sleeves, you can fill up your cart and close the tab, then click on the affiliate link in the description and check out. That way you can support the channel over at TCG Player, Card Market, and Dragon Shield. ¿Eres de México y necesitas cartas de Pokémon? Busca Hyperbeam Cards en Facebook e Instagram. Y si estás en Tijuana, búscalos en el local C27 en el Centro Comercial Otay.